The man, he's alive. The words didn't come out of my mouth. They hung in my chest, heavy and sharp. I stopped on the sidewalk. The traffic noise faded into a distant hum. The morning sunlight glinted off the boutique window, catching the edges of the chandelier inside. And there he was, my husband, alive, kneeling in front of a small boy, carefully putting leather shoes on his feet. Every movement, every tilt of his head, every little frown, it was him. Sterling, the man I had mourned, the man I had sold everything for, the man whose funeral I had attended 3 years ago. Beside him, a woman stood with soft curls and a gentle smile. She held a designer bag, watching him. Her eyes were satisfied, almost proud, and I felt something cold stab through my chest. They were a family now, a complete family, and I was not part of it. I didn't move. My name is Zoya. I am 42. For 3 years, I had believed he was dead. The plane crash had taken him, or so I thought. I cried over his portrait. I sold my jewelry, my father's antiques, my small apartment, just to cover the debts he had left behind. I thought I was doing the right thing, honoring his memory. But here he was, alive, laughing softly, loving a child that wasn't mine. And I was frozen. I pressed my hand to my mouth to stop a sob. My fingers shook. I reached for my phone, needing proof, needing reality, but afraid to see it. The air smelled faintly of coffee and asphalt. The city around me carried on indifferent. To my shock, people passed, cars honked, sunlight fell on the glass. Everything looked normal. Everything except the truth. Sometimes truth hits you when you least expect it. And when it does, it changes everything. I closed my eyes, but the image wouldn't leave me. The tiny boy, the smiling woman, Sterling kneeling as if nothing had ever happened. My chest ached, and for a moment I felt as though the world itself had stopped. 3 years ago, I had been in a hospital waiting room. The smell of antiseptic, sharp in my nose, my hands shaking as I clutched the phone. The news had come through like a thunderclap. A plane crash in international waters. Sterling was gone. No survivors. Nothing. Just a name on a list, and the endless echo of silence. I remembered the funeral. The flowers smelled faintly of lilies and wax. Friends and family whispered condolences I barely heard. I sat in the cold pew, holding a photograph of him, the frame heavy in my lap. I cried until my tears ran dry, until my body shook with grief. The casket was lowered, but part of me had known it was never really him inside. Just pieces, shadows, fragments I would have to carry forever. The apartment where I lived afterward was quiet in a way that hurt. Morning light fell across the floor, empty and still. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, surrounded by memories that weren't mine alone. His laughter, the warmth of his hand, the way he always kissed my forehead. And yet, none of it was real anymore, or so I thought. For 3 years, I had built a life around absence. I sold his clothes, his books, the apartment we had shared. I worked long hours, paid off debts that weren't mine, and tried to keep his family afloat. Every small act of devotion, every tear I shed, was a thread tying me to a man who no longer existed, or so I had believed. Now, seeing him alive, a new life before me, those memories both comforted and tore me apart. They reminded me of what I had loved, what I had lost, and what had been stolen from me in silence. Memory is a strange thing. It can hold you, warm you, but it can also freeze you, trap you in the past when the present is cruel. I stayed hidden behind the lamppost, my eyes locked on the scene inside the boutique. Sterling crouched down, adjusting the little boy's jacket. The child laughed softly, and Sterling's face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. The sunlight fell across his hair, highlighting every familiar curve of his face. Every movement, every gesture, screamed the truth I didn't want to accept. The woman beside him, her curls bouncing as she moved, smiled at him, reaching out to touch his arm lightly. Her hand lingered, comfortable, intimate. They were a family. They had built a world I wasn't part of. And the cruelest part, the betrayal wasn't loud or angry. It was quiet, seamless, perfect. I realized then that I hadn't just lost him in the crash. I had been replaced. not just by time or circumstance, but by someone he chose to love, someone he had built a life with while I mourned in silence. My chest tightened. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my shaking hands. Every word I had whispered to myself over 3 years trust, loyalty, faith suddenly felt like a lie I had believed in alone. The city moved on around me. Cars honked, a bus rumbled past, footsteps echoed along the pavement. Yet none of it touched a reality inside that boutique window. The air smelled faintly of coffee and polished wood. The boy squealed, and Sterling lifted him, spinning him around, smiling like the world was perfect. And for a split second, I saw the man I had loved, the man I had trusted completely, and I understood how deeply he had deceived me. People hide who they truly are. Sometimes it's obvious. Sometimes it's buried beneath years of smiles, promises, and memories. And sometimes it only reveals itself in a moment so sudden that your entire world tilts and you realize everything you believed was wrong. I turned slightly, breathing quietly, my fists clenched. The betrayal was sharp, but I did not scream. I did not run. I watched, learning, memorizing, storing every detail for the moment when I could finally make sense of it all. I walked away from the boutique without looking back. My legs felt heavy, but my mind was racing. Every step on the pavement was careful, measured. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I could feel the rage building inside me, a quiet, simmering fire that refused to burn out. I slipped into a small cafe a few doors down. The door chimed softly behind me. The smell of fresh coffee and warm bread filled the air, but it did little to calm the storm inside. I chose a seat by the window, far enough to watch the street, close enough to feel the sun on my face. The city noises were muted behind the glass, the distant honk of a car, footsteps echoing on the pavement, but inside, my thoughts were deafening. I wrapped my hands around a cup of coffee, the heat seeping slowly into my fingers. I took a slow breath, letting it calm the tremor in my chest. My mind replayed the scene over and over. Sterling kneeling, smiling at the boy, the woman beside him, so effortless, so certain in her place. The betrayal wasn't loud or messy, it was precise, almost invisible to anyone else. But I saw it. I understood it. Anger doesn't always need to shout. Sometimes it sits quietly, watches, waits. It sharpens your thoughts, steadies your hands, focuses your mind. That was what I felt now. A controlled fire. A determination that refused to spill into chaos. I would not allow him or anyone else to see me crumble. Not now. Not ever. I sipped the coffee slowly, letting the bitterness anchor me. I reminded myself that strength isn't always visible. True strength is patient, calculating. It waits for the right moment to act, never wasting energy on spectacle. My rage would not burn me. It would guide me outside. The city moved on as usual. People laughed. Cars rolled past. Sunlight caught the windows of neighboring shops. But inside me, a plan was forming, quiet and unrelenting. The world would not see my fury. It would see only what I allowed them to see. The memory hit me like a cold wind. I was back in that church, the day the world had ended for me. The bells tolled slowly, their echoes bouncing off the stone walls. Each chime felt heavier than the last, pressing down on my chest. I had held Sterling's portrait tightly in my hands, the frame digging into my fingers, and I could feel every heartbeat of my own grief in the silence between the bells. Family and friends surrounded me, their faces blurred by tears and shock. My mother-in-law clutched my arm, whispering words I barely heard. My father-in-law sat stiffly, staring at the casket that wasn't there. There had been no body, only fragments, debris, and a name on a list. The funeral felt unreal, like a cruel rehearsal for a life I was supposed to accept without question. I remember the cold stone floor beneath my feet, the chill creeping through my shoes, and the faint scent of lilies mixed with incense. I had cried until my tears ran dry, until my throat ached and my head throbbed. I whispered to the empty air, begging him to come back, wishing the impossible. Every face around me seemed a stranger, every word a hollow echo. After the ceremony, the world moved on while I stayed trapped in that moment. The apartment I returned to smelled faintly of dust and old wood, silent except for the soft ticking of a clock. Every corner reminded me of him, his jacket draped over the chair, the faint smell of his cologne lingering on the curtains. I had thought time would heal, that grief would fade, but it didn't. Not really. Even now, 3 years later, those memories surged back with a new sting. Seeing him alive, laughing, living a new life, it made the grief raw again, sharper than before. The funeral had never ended. It had paused, waiting, and now it collided with the cruel truth in front of me. Loss doesn't always fade. Sometimes it lingers, quiet and patient, waiting for the moment to remind you of everything you've endured and everything you've been denied. The apartment smelled faintly of old paper and dust. Empty boxes were stacked along the walls, reminders of a life I had dismantled piece by piece. Sterling's clothes were gone, his books sold. Every antique I had inherited, every item my father had cared for, had been exchanged for cash I barely saw. All to pay debts I didn't even owe. I had trusted him. I had believed he was honest, that the life we built together was real. But the truth hit me slowly, painfully. The debts were never real. The money I spent, the sacrifices I made, had vanished into a world he had secretly created, a world I would never be part of. I remember the auctions, the phone calls, the men in suits inspecting the antiques I had loved since childhood. Each sale felt like cutting away a piece of my heart. The delicate porcelain, the old bronze figurines, the jewelry passed down for generations all gone. And for what? For him to live another life without me. I sat on the floor among the empty boxes, the faint perfume of old papers clinging to the air. I pressed my forehead against my knees, trying to hold back the sobs. Anger mixed with grief, and a cold clarity began to form. This wasn't just betrayal of love. This was a betrayal of trust, of family, of everything I had believed in. I had mourned him for 3 years, sold my possessions to honor his memory, and yet he had built a life, a family, a fortune, all on the ruins of my devotion. Every quiet sacrifice, every sleepless night, every tear I shed had fed his new life. And I had been blind. Betrayal can reach every part of life. Not just the heart, not just love, but money, family, trust, and even the memories you thought were sacred. Sometimes, the cruelest truths are not the ones shouted, they are the ones carefully hidden, waiting for you to discover them in silence. I stayed across the street, hidden in the shadow of a lamppost, watching. Sterling lifted the little boy in his arms, spinning him gently. The boy's laughter rang soft and clear, echoing off the polished wooden floors. Sunlight streamed through the boutique windows, catching Sterling's hair, highlighting the familiar lines of his face. Every detail was painfully, impossibly real. The woman beside him clapped softly, smiling. Her eyes were warm, proud, completely at ease in a life that wasn't mine. My chest tightened, and I pressed my hand to it, trying to steady the racing of my heart. 3 years of mourning, 3 years of grief and sacrifice, and he had created this a new family, a new home, a new life without me. I remembered the mornings we had shared, the little routines, the quiet breakfasts, the plans we made. All of it erased, replaced by this bright, happy scene that felt like a knife twisting inside me. He was alive, and I had been mourning a ghost that had let someone else take his place. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my phone, needing proof, needing something tangible to hold on to. But even through the lens, the image hurt. Sterling's smile, the tenderness in his hands as he adjusted the boy's jacket, the casual intimacy of the woman beside him. It was a life I could not touch, a life I had been blind to. The city moved on around me. People walked past, cars hummed, the sunlight glinted off the street. But none of it mattered. I had been given a new cruel truth. The betrayal wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was quiet, complete, and devastating. The truth can strike suddenly, painfully, and leave you frozen in a moment you never imagined. I stayed hidden, memorizing every movement, every laugh, every stolen piece of my life. This was the reality I had to face. I slid into the back seat of A taxi, my body tense, my hands still trembling. The city lights blurred against the rain-streaked windows, streaks of gold and red mixing into long, melting lines. My phone rested heavy in my hand, warm from my grip. I hadn't called anyone yet. I didn't need to. Not now. For the first time since seeing him, the raw panic and fury began to settle. My breathing slowed. The fire inside me, once uncontrolled, narrowed into a sharp, quiet focus. I would not scream. I would not confront him blindly. This required patience, strategy, precision. 3 years of grief, sacrifice, and betrayal had taught me more than pain ever could. Every loss I endured, every empty room I walked through, had built me into someone who could endure, someone who could see clearly even when the heart screamed otherwise. I had allowed myself to be blindsided once. I would not again. I looked at my phone, scrolling through old messages, notes, and photographs. Every detail mattered. Every piece of evidence could become a step toward reclaiming what had been stolen from me. The tears I had stifled all morning returned briefly, but I pressed them back. Anger could wait. Action could wait. Planning could not. Outside, the city moved on. Cars honked, people laughed under umbrellas, neon signs reflected in puddles on the pavement. But inside me, the storm was calm. It was focused. It was deliberate. Revenge does not have to be loud. It does not have to be messy. True reckoning comes quietly, with care, with patience, and with absolute clarity. I would see this through. I would take back what was mine, not with chaos, but with certainty. And in that taxi, with the rain tracing patterns on the window, I made the first silent decision. I would act. Soon. Perfectly. I stood at the gate of the house I had once called home. The familiar lines of the fog looked smaller, somehow quieter. My hands tightened around the strap of my bag. My breath came shallow, but steady. Every step I took toward the door felt heavy, yet necessary. The door creaked as I pushed it open. A faint smell of dust greeted me, mingling with the subtle scent of polished wood. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, falling softly across the long corridors. The house was empty, but the memories lingered. Every corner whispered of laughter, arguments, and love that now felt distant, unreachable. I walked slowly, each step measured. My fingers brushed a smooth banister, the familiar texture grounding me. This was the place I had lived, fought, and mourned. For 3 years, I had returned only in memory. Now, I was back in flesh and bone, ready to face what I had avoided. The people who had allowed betrayal to flourish under my nose. The silence of the house was comforting and unsettling at once. No voices, no footsteps, only the soft creak of wood beneath my shoes. I could feel my heart beating in the quiet, reminding me that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it comes in quiet steps, in deliberate movements, in holding your head high when the past threatens to crush you. I paused at the threshold of the living room. Dust motes floated in the sunlight, moving slowly like tiny spirits of the past. I drew in a steadying breath. This house had seen my grief. It had witnessed my devotion. And now it would witness something else. My resolve. Courage often comes in quiet steps. And with each step I took deeper into the house, I reminded myself I was no longer the grieving widow, the naive woman who had believed in love blindly. I was ready to see the truth, face it, and reclaim the life that had been taken from me. I entered the living room quietly. Muted sunlight fell across the polished floors, catching the edges of the antique furniture. My mother and father-in-law sat as if nothing had changed, their faces composed, but eyes sharp and calculating. The room smelled faintly of perfume and polished wood, an air of practiced elegance that did little to soften the tension between us. I set my bag down and forced a small, polite smile. My voice was steady, calm, almost neutral. "I'm back," I said softly. No trembling, no tears, just words measured, controlled. They barely looked at me. My father-in-law's gaze lingered on the newspapers in his hands. My mother-in-law, poised and unreadable, tapped her fingers on the arm of her chair. I knew the questions were unspoken. Why so late? How was the trip? Did you handle the responsibilities we left with you? I had lived 3 years under their expectations, catering to their needs, covering their losses. Now, I faced them with the truth they had helped bury. Loyalty is tested in silence. I did not raise my voice. I did not demand recognition or explanation. I let the weight of the room speak for itself. I let my calmness be the mirror of their choices, the reflection of every slight, every hidden manipulation I had endured. I took a seat opposite them, hands folded in my lap. The silence stretched, filled only by the faint ticking of a clock and the soft rustle of papers. I observed them, memorized their gestures, their indifference, their subtle hints of control. Every detail mattered. Every small movement was a reminder of the power they wielded quietly and the strength I had built quietly in response. I did not leave immediately, nor did I confront them. I simply existed in the space between us, steady, unbroken. And in that quiet presence I realized loyalty is not blind. It is measured. It is earned. And the choices they made had finally met their witness. I remembered the mornings in that kitchen, soft sunlight spilling across the tiled floor, the faint clinking of cups as my mother-in-law prepared tea. She always insisted I drink it, saying it would restore my strength. "You've worked too hard," she would say, her voice gentle, almost caring. "This will help you recover." I drank it willingly, grateful for the comfort I thought it offered. But over time, my body changed. I felt weak, exhausted, pale. My skin lost its glow. My energy drained slowly, steadily. I blamed the long hours, the stress, the endless obligations I had taken on for the family. I didn't question her intentions. I trusted her, as I had trusted everyone in that house. Now, in the cold clarity of what I had discovered, I understood the truth. That kindness had been a mask, a carefully constructed veil hiding control, manipulation, and something darker. Each cup, each gentle word, each whispered encouragement had been part of the system designed to keep me weak, dependent, trapped. The kitchen, once warm with sunlight and the smell of herbs, now felt like a chamber of quiet cruelty. The faint clink of the cups echoed in my mind, a rhythm of betrayal I had not noticed. I had been poisoned not just in body, but in trust. Every act of care had been twisted into a method of control. Misplaced trust can harm deeply. It seeps quietly into your life, slowly breaking your strength, your confidence, your sense of safety. And yet, the pain also teaches. It awakens awareness. It sharpens the senses. I had been blind, but now I saw. I saw the careful ways they had shaped my obedience, my sacrifices, my devotion, all while constructing their own world of comfort and ease. The tea had tasted warm, sweet even, but its legacy had been bitter. And now, finally, I understood the depth of their cruelty and the quiet power I would need to reclaim my life. I zipped my bag shut and took a deep breath. The apartment felt empty, hollow, but it had served its purpose. Memories lingered in the corners, but I didn't look back. I was stepping out into the city, into the streets I knew so well, yet they felt different now, sharper, colder, alive with possibility. The wind cut through my coat as I walked, brushing my hair across my face. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then steady, drumming against the pavement. Each drop reminded me of the life I had lost, the betrayal I had endured, and the path I had finally chosen. I didn't run from it. I welcomed it. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside me, but I moved forward anyway. Every step was deliberate. Every footfall a quiet declaration. I would not be swept away by anger or grief. I would reclaim what had been taken. I would face the people who had built their lives on my sacrifices, the men who had erased me from his world. And I would do it with patience, with precision, with power tempered by understanding. The city moved on around me. Cars splashed through puddles, neon signs flickered in the rain, and people hurried past without a thought. I was invisible, yet acutely aware of every detail: the cold bite of the wind, the reflection of streetlights on wet asphalt, the distant sound of a siren. It all sharpened my senses, focused my mind, and reminded me why I had to act. Strength comes when we step into the storm. Not when we hide from it. And with each quiet step I took into the rain-slick streets, I felt that strength solidifying inside me. I was no longer a victim of circumstance, no longer bound by grief or misplaced trust. I was ready. The storm around me was nothing compared to the storm I carried within, and I was prepared to wield it. I found a quiet corner across the street, my coat pulled tight against the chill. The city moved around me, its soft hum fading into the background as I focused on him. Sterling, alive, smiling, laughing, living the life that had been stolen from me. I held my phone steady, camera zoomed to catch every detail without being noticed. The boy in his arms, the woman beside him, the subtle gestures of affection, they were pieces of a puzzle I had to understand. This wasn't about rage anymore. This was about clarity, precision, proof. For 3 years, I had lived in grief, in trust, in blind devotion. Now, I would see clearly. Every interaction, every smile, every small moment became evidence. The city noises, cars passing, distant chatter, a siren echoing down the street melted into insignificance. All that mattered was observation. All that mattered was truth. I took note of the furniture, the clothes, the patterns of their life. Every detail mattered. Every small luxury, every tiny act of normalcy was part of the story I needed to tell, the story I needed to prove. My hands no longer trembled from fury. They were steady, deliberate. Each photograph, each video clip was a step toward reclaiming what had been lost. Knowledge is the first step to justice. And I was gathering it slowly, quietly, carefully. I would not be impulsive. I would not be reckless. I would act with the power of certainty, with the authority of the truth in my hands. Hours passed like minutes. The sun shifted, shadows lengthened, but I remained, hidden, watching, learning, recording. By the time I left, my heart had calmed, my purpose sharpened. I had seen everything. I had proof. And the quiet power of that knowledge was mine alone. I stepped into the room, the familiar scent of polished wood and faint perfume greeting me. Sterling looked up from his chair, startled for the briefest moment before masking his surprise with a practiced smile. The woman beside him froze, uncertain. I didn't speak. I didn't move hastily. I let the quiet fill the space between us. The silence was heavy yet deliberate. Every eye on me. But I did not flinch. I let them feel it, the weight of my presence, the calm certainty that I carried. My hands rested lightly at my sides, steady. My gaze did not waver. Sterling's face, so familiar and so alien now, reflected confusion and a hint of unease. I didn't accuse. I didn't shout. I didn't demand explanations or apologies. The truth was already written in the air, in every gesture, every interaction. I had observed and recorded. I let it linger. I let it settle like dust on polished furniture, undeniable, unavoidable. He opened his mouth once, then closed it again. The woman's smile faltered. The quiet was louder than any argument, sharper than any accusation. They could feel the reality of their actions pressing in on them. The life they had built, the deceit, the betrayal, it all existed now in the same room as me. Undeniable and silent. Silence can speak louder than anger. It can cut deeper than fury. It can convey every truth your voice might fail to capture. And in that moment, I realized that my restraint, my calm, my quiet observation was more powerful than anything I could have shouted or cried. I took a single step forward, and it was enough. Sterling's eyes flicked down, the boy in the background, tugging at his sleeve, unaware. I didn't need to say a word. The message was clear. I saw. I knew. And the reckoning had begun. I stood at the edge of the balcony. The city stretched out before me in a blur of rain-streaked lights. The wind tangled my hair, cool and steady against my face. I breathed deeply, letting the rhythm of the city, the soft hum of traffic, and the distant chatter seep into my bones. Everything I had endured, the grief, the betrayal, the silent rage had led me here. The streets below glistened with rain, reflecting neon signs and street lamps like fragments of a broken past. I thought of Sterling, of the life he had built without me, of the 3 years I had spent carrying a world that wasn't mine. I didn't feel anger now. not in the way it had once consumed me. Instead, I felt a quiet power, a calm clarity that came from surviving, from seeing the truth and choosing my own path forward. I allowed myself a small smile. The city was alive, and so was I. Every tear shed, every sleepless night, every sacrifice had transformed into understanding, into wisdom, into strength. I had learned how to see, how to wait, how to act with purpose. I had reclaimed myself without needing to destroy anyone. The wind carried away the last of my doubts. I watched the rain tracing lines down the glass, each droplet a reminder that life moves, that pain passes, and that beginnings are often born from endings. I would never forget what had happened, but I no longer felt trapped by it. The past was behind me. The present was mine. Pain transforms into wisdom and strength. And standing there, on the balcony above the glowing city, I realized that this was more than survival. It was a promise to myself. I would live fully, love cautiously, and never again allow betrayal to define me. The storm had passed, but the calm it left behind was mine to keep.